Our guest today is full-time poet and entrepreneur Maria Giesbrecht, who you may know from her popular Instagram page, The Guelph Poet, her 2,000 plus subscriber Substack, or her writing community, Gather. In this episode, we discuss how you can build a career out of poetry, how to write stronger poems, and Maria's upcoming book, A Little Feral, which won the 2025 Jack McCarthy Prize to be published by Bright Bloody Publishing. So if you've ever wondered how to become an artist or poet full-time, this episode's for you. Maria Giesbrecht, welcome to the Poetry Vessel.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's a pleasure. And, this conversation I'd love to frame around how you have built a career out of poetry and also, of course, your new book. And we'll release some of those details further along in the episode. But first, can you, just for our viewers, could you please introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about how you came to poetry?
Yeah, so it's a bit of my whole life has been a bit of a journey. I grew up in a small Mennonite village in Durango, Mexico. And then my family decided to leave Mexico and leave that sort of more conservative old colony upbringing when I was 4 years old. And so we landed in southwestern Ontario and moved around a few times or so, but for the most part, have stayed in this general area that I'm living in now, which is near Guelph, Ontario, which is just outside of Toronto. And how I came to poetry was, I think, how many of us are introduced to writing in general, which is through some sort of teacher or through some sort of school. And the first time I really truly fell in love with poetry was in high school. And, as a Mennonite student, I found it very hard to fit in high school and find peers who enjoyed the same things I did. And so poetry became one of those things that I turned to um, for comfort and for solace, but also as a way to kind of start to discover who I am and who I was at the time. So Mrs. Stronach is my teacher. Everyone I think has some teacher that lit that fire within them. And Mrs. Stronach introduced me to poetry through a very interesting medium. She led us through hypnotic poetry prompts, and she was kind of strange and weird in the best way possible. And that was really the start of when I realized that I enjoyed this thing that we do, which is play with words and um, put together phrases and strangeness and silliness. And yeah, so that was the start of my first poetry blog ever. Was that was part of our assignment in that class, was to create an online portfolio, and then that was the birth of my first poetry blog. And so I've sort of been sharing my poetry with the internet in some capacity ever since.
That's wonderful. And of course, for our listeners, could you explain a little bit about what being a Mennonite entails and how, poetry interacted with that?
Yeah, so the specific group of Mennonites that my family was a part of and that I sort of grew up in, the culture permeated almost every part of our living and every part of our lifestyle. So
Mm.
a lot of the values are, of course, based on the Bible. They're religious. And I think the one that really made its mark on me was the virtue of staying silent, especially for little girls and women. It's seen as a very virtuous thing to not speak up and to stay quiet. And I remember many times feeling like shushed because I was a very chatty kid and I'm still very chatty to this day. I had a really hard time like suppressing when I wanted to say something. And so it was kind of annoying, I think, at times because I would just like blurt it out. And I think that I associated being quiet with being good. And so I always was at odds with who I truly felt like I was and also wanting to change that.
Mm.
And I think for the first time when I discovered poetry, there was no one on the other end of it telling me to be quiet. I could write as much as I wanted and I could share as much as I wanted or as little as I wanted. And I was all in my control. And it was a very private thing at first. So, like, there was no one judging on the other end. And of course, as soon as you start posting on the internet, you open yourself up to that. But I think that came at a time when I was ready for it. But at first, it was like in my journal, and I was for the first time in my life, feeling like I didn't have to be quiet. And that was a really powerful discovery of an acceptance of who I was and who I still am to this day. I'm not a quiet person. And now I love that about myself. But I think that was one of the virtues that in a way harmed me the most from that time of my life.
Yeah, yeah. So you feel like a sense of freedom came about as a result of being able to express yourself, using the language and tools of poetry.
Absolutely. I think I've never felt more free than when I'm writing poetry. I never feel less limited than when I write poetry. One of my professors in my MFA program talks about writing expensive scenes. Now, mind you, this was from a fiction workshop, but he talks about how it doesn't cost anything to write a very expensive scene. That you have, if you're creating a movie, if you're a filmmaker, it's very expensive. The budget would be wild if you created like all these zombies coming in and like, it's surreal. But in writing, that costs the same as a very plain scene. And so he always encourages us to not be afraid to write the expensive scenes. And I think for poetry, that translates to me as in not to be afraid to write the risky stuff and not to be afraid to write the things that you might feel like are hard to say in real life. And I think I feel like I'm going in a bit of a circle here, but I think what I'm trying to say is that it felt like I was allowed to be a lot more risky with my thoughts and my opinions and what I felt about my life through poetry as like a vehicle almost. And then I realized like, oh my God, this is what I believe. This is who I am. But I almost had to do that in the poem first before I like came to that knowledge. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I like to think, when you come to the page and write something, for me, it's like I hope that I am surprised, and through that surprise, I learn something, and it's not necessarily just in the moment; it can be retrospective over time. It could be like, oh, that's the kind of like there's a part of me like in the unconscious that's like you need to know this, and here is the way in which you're allowing it to be expressed because you're kind of loosening that threshold, I think, between like the ego and the unconscious to allow something new to emerge to yourself. So in that sense, for me, I see, poetry as this emergent thing that happens in the present. You also started sharing your poetry online and have amassed quite a following. Could you
Mhm.
speak about, the beginning stages of that, of posting online, through your Instagram, your Substack, and like how you've cultivated and allowed that to grow since?
Yeah, I think thankfully for me, it's been a bit of a slow burn, relative to maybe some other folks' experience in gaining a readership online. I like the word readership a lot more than followers. It feels more wholesome.
Mm,
Um, I think at first for me it was something that I did because I didn't really know what I was doing. Like I was very new to the poetry world. I knew nothing about publishing. I knew nothing about literary magazines. I did not know what an agent was. I didn't even know the difference between like self-publishing or traditional publishing. That was all like just out of my vocabulary. I just didn't know. And so all I knew was what I was doing and what I saw in front of my day to day. And so I think I started running into other folks who started posting their poetry online on Instagram. And in them, I found what probably felt like the first time my people. Um, and so we started doing this thing together where we would write and write and write. And I remember one April, National Poetry Writing Month, we did the NaPoWriMo Challenge, which is you write a poem every single day in April. And that was the first year where I posted a poem every day on my Instagram in April. And I remember like all the people I knew in real life unfollowed me because they were like, what is this person doing?
yeah.
um, and in that way, it kind of organically became my poetry page on Instagram. I never created like a new page or anything. It just morphed into that. And and so I just found I found it really enjoyable to read other poetry. It gave me momentum to feel encouragement from other people on my poems. And I think this is really important because we often think of external validation and needing external validation as a negative thing.
Mm.
But I think as artists and as writers, especially in the early stages when you're just kind of figuring it out and you're not really sure what you have, but you know that you love what you're doing and there's something there, it can be extremely, extremely rewarding to hear from other people. Like, I think I would not have continued completely, truthfully, and honestly, if I didn't feel that there was someone on the other end of this thing who was enjoying what I was reading and it became like a shared experience. So it gave me momentum to keep going. And I think now I see external validation. Like I think it's still necessary, but it's not something that I'm like driving towards. But in the early stages of my writing career, it was very, very important. And that's one thing that I think Instagram gives you that the traditional publishing route doesn't, especially in literary magazines where they have maybe 10 people reading their magazine, unfortunately. We need to read more literary magazines, everyone. But you don't ever receive real feedback like in time. Like nobody's going to email you and say, "Hey, I really loved the poem you published in the Chestnut Review" or something. Like it's hard to know who's reading your work and it's hard to know what they're feeling after you publish it. So that was one of the best gifts that Instagram ever gave me was a connection with a reader in real time. And then over the last 4 or 5 years or so, it's sort of just bloomed into something really beautiful, very challenging at times because social media algorithms, like feelings of worthiness, like all of that comes up, of course. And so I don't want to just glamorize it as this like beautiful thing. I think it has been a tool in my career. It's been very valuable, but it's not going to be the like I don't want my Instagram to be the be all and end all of my writing career. I see it very much as like a stepping stone to another journey in another chapter of my life. But I'm really grateful mainly for the people that I've met on Instagram. That's the biggest thing that I would take away is that like I just would not have found my poetry people, and they're the dearest and nearest to my heart. So go
Yeah.
Instagram for
Yeah.
that.
Maybe you won't put it on your gravestone, but it's an important thing to have as you move forward. So one thing I just want to there's a couple of things I want to reply to that. One's very quick. If you do read this is for everyone out there. If you read someone's poem in a magazine, you really appreciate it. Most poets love being reached out to. I know I've reached out to others and said, "Hey, I read this." I've had people reach out to me and invite me to submit to their magazines as a result of reading it. It never feels bad for that because I mean, writing, you're communicating, and you're I would say for poetry is like there's an invitation to dialogue happening. So if you do that, some people might not respond. Some people maybe don't want that. But like, I think on the whole, a lot of poets like hearing that their work was read and considered. I know that, you told me the other day that you felt some sense, in one moment at least, pressure to write something that you thought, oh, this could go further or go and reach as many people as possible. But then you told me that you stopped that impulse. And can you speak a little bit about that and the pressures of writing authentically and writing, let's say, algorithmically?
Yeah. I've had two poems like go what people, I guess, statistically would call viral. One of the poems, You've Got Green Pennies for Eyes, and then My Bathtub Love Poem, um, which both poems I had no intention of like going viral. I didn't know. But I remember after the second one went viral, the bathtub poem, just curiously, because my background is in accounting, before I quit my job, I was a corporate accountant. Um, just out of curiosity, I started looking at the statistics behind those posts, and I was curious, what was it actually that drove these posts to reach so many people? And I want to say this, um, knowing that maybe somebody's going to be listening and think that this is what I should be using as a template to go viral. And I'll explain why that's not a good idea. But what I noticed was that the number one thing that pushed the algorithm to that sort of breaking point was the amount of people that shared my poem to their Instagram stories. So that share button was really, really important. And essentially what that told me was that a poem resonated with someone if they felt like there was a part of themselves in that poem, or they could reflect or even project something of their lived experience onto that poem, and then therefore resonate with it so much that they're willing to share it to their story. Because a personal story, this is very different from a business account, but anyone posting on a personal story is resharing something to their story most of the time because they're trying to show that this is me. I relate to this. This is cool. Like I am this thing. And and then I remember like shortly after that second poem went viral, sitting down and thinking, well, what else would someone want to share to their story? And like I think I like started brainstorming, and then thankfully I caught myself and realized A, number one, my brain was out of ideas. I couldn't come up with really anything good at all. Um, and then I realized like, wow, that would be a very slippery slope to go down. And I didn't want to. And so I never tried to do that again. And I mean, as a result, I really haven't ever had a poem go viral again. And I, it's been a slower burn ever since. That was like the thing that kind of got me over that hump of like reaching a lot of people. But then it sort of petered out. And I think it can sometimes feel like we want to keep chasing that big moment or that big thing. We want to get the feeling. But I think if you want a long-term sustainable love for your writing and relationship with your writing, then these moments happen far and few between, and it's so much better to accept that it probably won't happen again, maybe ever for me. And that's okay. Like if that's what I'm chasing, then maybe my love for language and words is not what it should be, or what it used to be anyways. But yeah, kind of a wake-up call, I think.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think it's a really good thing that you caught early. I think that's something that could be so tempting to not even catch and
Mhm.
to keep going for and keep chasing and keep kind of knocking your head against the wall and like, how can I do this? And I think that that can be, almost like polluting of the art itself rather than, as you said, like honoring like the language as it needs to emerge. Like the way I think of things is like I write to express and I edit for an audience. Like, I want to edit, say something in the way that I want to say it, but I do realize that it's going to someone. I do realize that I'm communicating. Like even right now, what I'm saying, I'm not just saying this because it's me. It's like I'm communicating with you and then also with the people that will be listening to this. So there's always
Mhm.
some form for me of consideration outside. It just comes later. If I think of it early, it tends to be like, it's like, what would someone else want to read as a poem? And then it's like,
Mhm.
I'm almost not honoring something inside me. And then that part of me is like, yeah, I'm going to shut this valve. You're
Mhm.
doing it wrong. um, that I'm sure, if any listeners out there feel differently and they write exclusively for an audience, I'd love to hear, counter examples or arguments against that. But that's kind of how I feel about it.
I think there's a magic too that gets sort of erased from the process when we're trying to reverse engineer. It's almost like if our poems and us are in a relationship, it's like that toxic, anxious attachment chasing towards the avoidant attachment, if the poem is the avoidant attachment. And then like that's not healthy, right? I think it's when you're in tandem and you're waiting for each other, and the poem approaches, you approach, then there's some magic that happens in between. But if the poem hasn't approached yet and you are running after it, that poem will be long gone very, very, very fast.
It's running away from you.
Yeah, I imagine so anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that in mind, would you well, I'll just introduce, I know you have a book that, at the time of publishing this video will be coming out fairly soon. It's on pre-order called A Little Feral. I would love if you could read a poem from that and we'll get into discussing the book a little bit later. But yeah, I think it's time to hear one of the poems from your book.
Absolutely. Do you have a preference, Nathan, or should I go by my intuition?
Go by your intuition, what you feel like is best to share right now with me and everyone else listening.
Wonderful. I think I'll share a bit of a poem that's a little surreal. It's actually quite seasonal, but I like it, so we'll read it. This is called The Beginning of It All. Maple leaves in the backyard, like leather shavings. The garden molds from the edges, sighs, sits on the edge of August like she's a bathtub. Shh, the magic manifests at night. The sweaters are knit from umbilical cords, feeding the strangeness between seasons.
Thank you. Yeah, this is one of the poems when I was reading the manuscript that leapt out to me exactly for that. I mean, I know it self-references, the strangeness between seasons, and it was one of those ones that was really fully in that dream realm. And you have this simile sits on the edge of August like she's a bathtub. And I find that it's one of those images that rings true in the strange sense in that I'm like, oh, I haven't thought of it like that, and it's kind of gifted my imagination this new image to kind of play with and shift and morph. And yeah, I really and the sweater's knit from umbilical cords. Could you talk to me a little bit about these images and their emergence?
Yeah, I think I wrote this poem during a prompt session in my writing community, and we were talking about surreal poems. And sometimes we do meditations before we write. And I remember this meditation the session was right as fall was beginning. So it was right in the in between between seasons. Like I feel like we're in between seasons right now, between winter and spring, but this was between summer and fall. And I always find that there is an inherent sort of strangeness in the in between. And as a poet, I'm really interested in writing about places that are in between two things. And for me, it almost felt like there's like that image of the strange or the sweaters knit from umbilical cords is like the idea that a sweater is like this warming thing, and then the umbilical cord is very contrasted to that, but it's still life-giving. Um, I think I was just really in a headspace of giving way to weird things. And sometimes when that happens, like really cool stuff comes out. Not all my poems are like that in the book, but a few of them are. And this one I just had a lot of fun with. It actually almost didn't make it into the manuscript. It was one of the few that were on the fringe as we were editing, but I fought for it because I thought it was strange in a unique way.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. It kind of makes me think of poets like Lorca and the Spanish poets in the imagery. And, I speak about this quite a lot on the Poetry Vessel, but strangeness being a inherent kind of qualia to poetry. And I think it's Auden, I might be getting the person wrong, but it's like poetry helps make the familiar strange and the strange familiar. And
Mm.
I think one of the prime ways we do that is through simile and metaphor creation when you bring two things which do not seem like they belong together, but somewhere intuitively they do. There's like something that references across, like we said on the edge of on the edge of August, like she's a bathtub. It's like, if you get into like the prosaic and you go, what does that really mean? It's like, you can run into all sorts of labyrinths, but taking it like bodily and like imaginatively, it just snaps into place. And I find this so compelling about poetry in general that strangeness is the thing that I think makes it this deep well of using language in ways that in our day-to-day lives we don't tend to use, or at least aren't always aware that we use, because we have dead metaphors and cliches that emerge all the time, but we don't always recognize their inherent strangeness because we're so used to hearing them. There's no image that gets cast.
Yeah, I think in that way, strange images and strange metaphors are actually more true than plain ones. Um, because it takes a second for our mind to process what what we're hearing. And so it doesn't just like register in the back of our mind as something we have accepted, but we have to actually actively kind of digest it in our mind. Um, and I think that is a really good place for truth to come out. Um, Sometimes we talk about truth in poetry in my writing community, and we talk about how sometimes things in a poem that aren't true can be more true than things that are true, for
Mhm.
lack of a better word, or for lack of a better way of saying that. Um, and I think strangeness is one of those in a poem. Like one of my biggest fears in life is being boring, and I think my second biggest fear in life is writing boring poems. And I think sometimes we can think that a plain way of saying something is a true way of saying something, or even like a boring way of saying something, it means that it's more true. But I have found when I'm reading something, for me to believe it, something has to be a little weird about it, or else I don't really trust it. Um, and that's why I think like these kind of surreal poems can often be vehicles for revealing greater truths than perhaps a very more like plain spoken poem. Um, Maybe they can both be, but that's what I'm arguing today.
Yeah, no, I feel similarly, and I have what I was reading earlier is you using a lie in poetry. It's more like you're stretching the truth to go beyond the tr to go beyond truth, to go to something that you can actually really experience. It's like the function of elevating language is to have the experience of the language itself. It's to make the language do things in interesting ways. And if you are just true to events, Ted Kuza talks about this in his um, Poetry Home Repair Manual. If you're just true to events, you're kind of telling an anecdote. And there's nothing wrong with
Mhm.
an anecdote. It's fun. But is it necessarily poetry? You'd argue that you need to elevate up out of the
Mhm.
anecdote if you're writing a poem. And I think that, using images, using metaphors, creating strangeness is a way of doing this.
Hmm. Yeah, and even more, I think we can also think if a poem is simply true to the facts, then what other truths are we robbing ourselves of? Like the truth of beauty, the truth of sound, the truth of tension. Like if none of those things are in play, then are we really telling the truth? Like, and also, I guess it really maybe doesn't matter if what you know is the truth. It matters if the person behind the poem believes it, because truth is a two-way street. And so, like, if that person behind who is reading the poem behind the screen or behind the book doesn't believe you, but it is factually true, then is it true? You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. Just something to think about.
And even simple things, if maybe you have in a memory and there was a blue door, but it suits the rhythm of the poem for it to be a yellow door. Hold on 2 seconds. There was a knock on the door just as I was saying that.
No
That's
worries.
Jung.
That's creepy.
He would call that synchronicity. That is really strange.
Now, is it a blue door or a yellow door?
It's a blue curtain, so I think to go back, it's funny because even in the sounds, blue door sounds way more interesting than yellow door. So I'm going to reverse the thing that I said. But maybe if it was a yellow door, this is actually glass and transparent, but um, like we're trying to be. But yeah, if you change the image from the memory, it's fine. If it suits the poem more to do that, you can do that. It's not like outright lying. I think there's a way in poetry you can deceive in ways by making it sound
Mhm.
like you've had certain experiences or you understand something that you don't. But I think
Mhm.
you're more likely not to succeed in that. Like, your readers aren't stupid. They're going to
Mhm.
pick up on things if you're being disingenuous. Like a reader can notice that. So I want to talk about, before we talk about your book specifically, that you have been building or have built and are continuing to build a career out of poetry. And I think it'd be really valuable if you could talk to our audience about Gather, the writing community that you've made there, like your decisions behind why you decided to, build a life out of this that includes making a living from it.
Yeah. I think it started with entering the workforce in my early 20s. I went to school, I got a business degree, and then I entered the workforce in accounting. And I was working in corporate Canada, I suppose I should say, instead of corporate America. Um, and I noticed that there were things that were different about me than my colleagues, and not in a way of like I'm special or anything, but just like there was a hunger and a desire for something more. I remember I would go on my lunch break to have like my little whimsical picnic by the river, and I'd bring my poetry books and I'd write my little poems in the margins of like the balance sheets that I was working on at the time. And I realized like I really love this thing, and the career that I've chosen is a career that I chose because I was good at it and not because I liked it. And I chose to go into it because someone in my career counselor at school said you would be really good at accounting. And I was like, yeah, okay. People do things that they're good at, so I should do that. Um, and I realized very quickly that liking something and being good at it are two very, very different things. So I excelled in my accounting career, which actually made it a little bit harder to do the next thing, which was decide to leave. I'm lucky enough to be engaged to, I wasn't engaged to at the time, but I was dating my partner who works for themselves. And there was a lot of support and encouragement on his end to take a risk that he had already taken in his career. And funny enough, he was an accountant as well, so we both came from an accounting background. We had that to bond over. So I ended up leaving my corporate accounting job, and Corey really encouraged me to try this poetry thing somehow. And the word that we always come back to is called piecemealing, which basically just means diversifying your revenue streams in corporate speak.
Yeah.
But I really had to think about like I have bills to pay and I have some skills. I think I had taught one poetry workshop at that time. And so I thought about what I like to do, what I really like to do every day, and that was write. But it was also this poetry community that I had started connecting with online that I felt very, very passionate about giving back to and serving and cultivating. And so I came up with this idea called Gather, and we were going to write together every week. I think we started with only 8 weeks at a time. And so Gather was born 2.5 years ago, so January of 2 years ago. And it was 14 writers, and we met on Sunday morning. We called it Sunday Morning Gather. And I felt very much like an imposter at the time, having only taught one workshop, but I had a deep kind of sense that there was more to what we were doing than getting better at writing poetry. And
Mm.
that was sort of affirmed for me when we did it again and again, and the word started spreading. And of course, I got better at facilitating, but nothing like profoundly changed in what we were doing, except I discovered what perhaps the magic was and that was that we were caring for each other's poems. And then that was really the philosophy that I discovered and really ran with, was that it is important and necessary for poets to care for each other's poems and also to have their poems cared for. And I think it's actually way more important than getting published. It's more important than getting a book, getting an agent. Like these things are professional accomplishments, but having your poems cared for is like an emotional accomplishment. And as writers, we can often feel like the things that we do in the writing journey we are on feels like we are alone,
Mm.
especially poets, because so few people are poets. I know sometimes it can feel like we know so many poets now that we're all connected on the internet, but in real life, most of the poets in Gather, or when I first started speaking and sharing with them, they shared with me that very few people in their real life actually knew that they wrote poetry, knew that they were a part of this writing poetry or this poetry community online, um, and much less like had a a thoughtful way to speak about their poems and definitely not give feedback. So we sort of developed the rest of the community with that in mind. Like I really wanted people to feel like somebody gave a shit about their poems because I did. And they gave a shit about my poems and we did that for each other, and that is the magic and beauty that is the poetry community now. We have over 100 active members from pretty much all over the world, which is really exciting. And we're growing like a good weed, I suppose. Yeah. So I forget what the original question was, but I'm just really proud of us.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I think it's really, beautiful what you've been building and growing. And, if someone came up to you with advice and said, how could I make poetry? How could I make a career? Or how could I make a living also out of poetry? I know everyone's individual, but what advice would you be tempted to give them?
Um, I think the thing I would tell them is to be extremely generous in what you offer yourself to other poets, and that will come back to you tenfold. And that the community or the table is large enough for everyone, that there is actually a lot less competition than one might think. Um, and that connecting with other writers and other people who love poetry will get you the furthest in terms of like industry connections for people who have like who are hiring for jobs in this industry, because you can go two routes. You can freelance or you can get a job. All of it hinges on who you know, who trusts you, who's connected to you. And it requires a lot of giving, and that giving will eventually come back in beautiful ways. And because it's like it's a ecosystem, like I forget what it's called, like when two things benefit one another, symbiotic,
Symbiotic.
symbiotic relation. Yeah, symbiotic relationship. I really think that's what it is. And um, I have I have always tried to like keep that at the forefront of my mind, even when it comes to like inviting guest poets into our space to teach, like paying them very, very well, even when at first I could not afford it. I was putting that on a credit card. But at the end of the day, like now I feel the fruit of that energy because that energy has been returned to me. And I think it can feel, especially at the beginning, like a scarce environment. And in many ways, it is like there isn't a lot of money in poetry. It's a true statement, but it's not an encouraging one. And it also is not really a life-changing one. And I think two things can exist in your mind at the same time. Understanding the reality of what it might be currently, and also diluting yourself enough to get past that. It's like, I don't want to say that it's important to be delusional, but it is a little bit, because you have to get past um, your initial like walls up against the reality of how hard it is to succeed in an industry like this. And how I did that was through meditation. I used to go to sleep every night listening to a meditation, and it was basically just an affirmative meditation that I was living an abundant life and that energy was going to come back to me in many ways. And again, like if I was listening right now, I maybe I'm cringing hearing myself say this, um, because like it's so important to work hard too. But you if you're the first person to tell yourself no, you won't give the chance to have someone else tell you yes. So you have to bet on yourself and say yes to yourself, even when it looks like the chances of succeeding are very slim. And maybe that's what people call being delulu. I'm not sure, Nathan, but
That's all good. Yeah, I know, and I understand it can be dichotomous as well to have the business head and the poet head, and they can inform each other, but they can also be completely separate things in the sense that, you know, we've kind of touched a little bit on this in our communications before, but you've written somewhere, I think it was in your Substack, where you said like the main and most important thing is the poem for the connection, is to write the poems, is to put them out there, is to, you know, that's the perhaps the point of proof of what you're doing. And then when you take people in to gather, you know, even in the name, this gather, you come gather together, you gather things,
Mhm.
is community. And it kind of goes back to saying like poems as communication in community. When you are sharing poems and you're honoring other people's expression, I would say in a way that, one, you honor the way in which people express themselves and you search for the craft to help people become better. That's kind of the mission that we have on the Poetry Vessel. I'm like, poetry is a democratic art in the sense, if you have language, you have poetry. You are able to express it, you can speak it, you can write it, you can act it out in any way that you like. And then there comes like the craft and the skill building, which is also part of it, depending on how much you want to, you know, work on it. So I think what you're doing is exciting, and I think it's great. And you know, I'll put everything in the description box on YouTube about, you know, Gather and all the other things that you're doing. But I would like to move to talking about your book, A Little Feral. First, I'd like you to tell us where that title came from, and you know, the process of getting that book published by Right Bloody Publishing. Yes, I'd love to hear more about this, and then, you know, also invite you to read a poem afterwards.
Yeah, so the name comes from one place originally, and then it sort of manifested in another way, but I'll explain. Um, one of my, I guess, toxic traits, if perhaps you could call it that as a poet, is that I like to write in my pajamas like a little raccoon in the morning. And sometimes if I get in a groove, it will be like past noon by the time I get changed and ready for the day, admittedly. And when that happens, my fiance Corey used to come into my office and say, "Maria, you look a little feral." And and I did. I was like this little feral, like, raccoon or critter at my desk, just like trying to like squeeze out every last drop, like no time to brush my teeth, 2 cups of coffee's in. So that's the original kind of like funny version of a little feral. And then I actually saw someone's bumper sticker in our neighborhood, and it was a little feral, like after like many months after that started. Corey and I were on a walk, and I was like, "Look, oh my God, it's me." And then I wrote a poem called A Little Feral. And so the poem is about the bumper sticker. And it's also about being like a little feral for God and having God still accept you the way that you are, or the way that the speaker of the poem is. And so I published that poem with Only Poems at the beginning of last year. At that time, still, my book manuscript didn't, like, I think I had an early, very, very early draft, but it didn't have that poem in it, and it also didn't have that title. But I really worked on it, and I submitted it to the Jack McCarthy Prize. And originally, the title of my book was Breaking God, um, as in like taming a horse, you break a horse.
Mm.
So taming God, kind of. And then we decided not to go with that title, and instead we went with A Little Feral. So I look back now with fondness still on my original title, but ultimately it was for SEO purposes that we weren't able to have the first title, because they were worried that it would end up in the religious section of like search. Um, Anyways, I don't know SEO, so I trusted the publisher knew what they were doing. But for what it's worth, though, the title has really grown on me. I love the poem in it, and it's a funny story now that, that's what I was when I was writing the poems in the book, was I was literally a little feral. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And there's something I was reading elsewhere that you have a writing ritual from 7 till 9 in the morning, which was really
Mhm.
interesting because I know that Mary Oliver spoke about having a writing desk, but she'd speak about 7 to 9 in the evening for her. And I want to
Mhm.
know, what do you think is, I'm guessing this is not too long after you wake up. Like, why is the morning such a good time for you for creativity?
It's the only time of day where I feel like nobody is asking anything of me. The moment I open my email, the moment I look at my phone, I, like, for better or for worse, there are so many emails, there are so many messages, and I feel like a deep responsibility to answer and to communicate and to work on things. So it feels like I have successfully been able to keep that early morning space very, very sacred and for me. It's very rare that I take a meeting or do anything like quote unquote productive in those hours. Um, and I think by the end of the day, I don't know how people write in the evenings. I truly, truly don't. Like, I am spent at 5 p.m. I pour my glass of sparkling water and I sit down on the couch and I am like, I'm done. I'm tired. I don't know how people, like, it's very rare that I write in the evenings. Once in a while, if I drink wine, I don't drink wine that much anymore because of my health. But a few years ago, if I had a glass of wine in the evenings, then I would maybe sometimes write, because it felt like there was a layer of inhibition that was gone. But I'm like a morning person through and through. I even like it, sometimes I will edit in the afternoons. I will say that. I try to keep my mornings for just the writing and then editing in the afternoons, but um I'm so tired in the evenings. I also have a problem, like I sleep 12 hours a day, which, yeah, is a little wild. So I find it hard to like be awake to write. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I think,
Mhm.
like you said before, someone asks anything of you. In one of Michael Pollan's book, he speaks about spotlight consciousness and lantern consciousness. So the spotlight being like specific. And I think of if someone's asking a task, you're kind of in spotlight. It's like, I need this from you. So you go, okay, A, therefore B. And then with poetry, it's kind of like still in this dreaming lantern where where like you can kind of travail more spaces. So if you think of like the lantern in a forest, there's way more things that you can see rather than like just narrowing in on a tree. So I feel similarly, though, I can write later in the day, but yeah, the morning is like the peaceful time where I can choose to do that, though I should be a bit better with being more ritualistic more often.
Mhm.
It goes back and forth. But before I get too far into that, could you share with us another poem from A Little Feral?
I would love to. Hmm. Um, Maybe I'll share a poem from towards the end of the book. This is, I think, one of my favorite poems that I've ever written. I still want to be a good person, even though I am a June bug without a father, even though the grass is brown and it's all my fault, even though the dead speak to me and I gatekeep their wisdom. Ha. Bold hair on someone's arms. Let me return his fear. I want to be a good person, even though I lasso my neck towards death, dip my finger into the sunset before my elders have eaten. I am a jar of marmalade. I am a lid. I am a fool with a tight grip. There's nothing left except for me. For me.
Yeah, this is another one that leapt out to me. There's a couple things. It made me think of Yeats's, I believe it was Yeats's statement, wisdom is a property of the dead.
Oh.
And when you got to the end, it made me think the Robert Frost poem that ends, and there's miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. And
Mhm.
the for me, like that death kind of like ghost echo that
Mhm.
happens at the end of your poem. I was like, ah, that was a nice, speaking of surprise and also of that like that strangeness came in. There was there's a few images in there that did that, but like right at the end, it just tied together so nicely.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I love when poems end on a repeated phrase. One of my favorite poems ever is "The Sleeping" by Lynn Emanuel, and it's a really beautiful love poem, and it ends on roses, 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 and it's just it. There's something about it that I love. I think I love repetition at the end of a poem as like one of my favorite ways to end a poem ever, and I like it more than repetition in like anaphora where it's like every line begins in the same thing or every stanza begins in the same thing. It's just I think it's a little old school, but there's something about it that really speaks to me.
Yeah, I find it constantly almost anchoring. And this isn't at the end of the poem, but think of Elizabeth Bishop's The Fish, where she has rainbow, rainbow, rainbow. And one thing I find especially interesting in repetition is when it's performed or read, aloud and it's on the breath, because each word can become very different. I think when it's on the page, you know, for me, when I'm reading, like sometimes I forget to dramatize a little bit. It might sound
Yeah.
like the same each time, but when it's read out, it's like, oh, there's so many ways that you could, the end of your poem could be like, for me, for me. Like
Yeah.
there's, you could play around in so many ways. And, I think that with any poem, like no two performances are exactly the same. And there's not one
Mm.
absolutely definitive way that you must read it like this. But yeah, no, one thing I'm interested in here is that you have many poems that are, I would say, spiritual. And
Mhm.
I know somewhere you've spoken about finding the spirit in all things. And
Mhm.
even in the objects of the mundane world, it exists. I'm wondering if, especially in the light of leaving the Mennonite faith, whether you could talk to me a little bit about the spirituality and the holiness that you see in the world and how that finds its way into your poetry.
Yeah, I think when I started experimenting with the idea of leaving my faith was like in my late teens. And there was an energy to it that felt very rebellious. And at that time, it was very necessary for me to feel that because it gave me a way out. Like, I don't think I would have found a way out if I didn't have that sort of frantic energy inside of
Mm.
me. And so I'm very grateful that I was able to get angry and I was able to be rebellious. Um, but after I had felt that way for a few years, there was something in me that was missing the parts of being in church that I really loved. And one of the things that I really loved was worshiping. I was a part of the worship band. I played guitar, and there was a way that that I felt like I was connecting with something holy when everyone was singing the same song and everyone was raising their gaze towards one shared goal or one shared, I guess at that time it was God. And I loved that feeling. And I remember thinking, like, gosh, that's so sad that I will never experience that again. And then I I think I started, it was like slowly, I started finding little moments like that that were not connected to God. I remember when I was in Costa Rica a few years ago by myself on a trip, and it was very early in the morning, and no one was at the beach yet. And I was in the water, and I felt like something was lulling me, almost like a mother would a child, like rocking me in their arms or in its arms, or I couldn't describe really what that feeling was, but I recognized it. And I recognized it was the same feeling I had in my chest and in my bones when I was doing that worshiping in church. And I think that was the first time when I picked up on the fact that maybe that magic was not um, this one thing called God, but rather that I could access it through me. And maybe that I was channeling some sort of magic. And not that I was magic, but like that I was able to be a conductor for magic and that feeling without necessarily being a part of an organized religion. And then that feeling started coming to me in unique ways, and especially it started coming to me through poetry. And when I wrote a really good poem, sometimes I quite literally felt and still do feel like I'm floating. And
Mhm.
and from there that like it was game over, Nathan. I could find it everywhere. I could go to the farmers market and almost weep at the scent of the peonies that the farmers market ladies were selling. I just get so emotional talking about this, but it was life changing for me because I realized I didn't have to pick, that I could live a very full, whimsical life that felt like I was touching and walking on holy ground. And a lot of the painful parts of being in such a secluded, conservative, I don't want to say cult, but like sect of religion, I suppose. I could leave all of that behind me. And that felt really, really fucking good. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, and so that's how we're a lot of these poems, like I discovered that through poetry, and I think that's why I'm still so obsessed with poetry. It's because I'm accessing something that feels spiritual to me. And really, I've gotten nothing but great things out of it. It hasn't hurt anyone. Like, isn't that beautiful? It's so beautiful to me.
Yeah, and I think thank you for sharing that. And I feel, poetry fundamentally for me often can foster, the poems that I return to the most and the ones when I write them and I'm like, oh, I got that, understanding from something as we are talking about earlier, have something transformative in them. It's like I want to enter a poem and have a poem enter me, and for me to come out of it changed in some way. Now, sometimes that change is more dramatic, sometimes it's more subtle.
Mhm.
And this happens especially for me when either I'm writing something myself or if I hear a poem that I really like from someone else. Like I'll often ask
Mhm.
my wife Rachel if there's a poem that I've returned to many times. I'm like, please, can you read me this? And I might have read it 100 times. And when she reads me it, a completely new understanding emerges because I get to close my eyes, I get to dream a bit, and I get to see all these images churning. And this became especially true. I was reading The Second Coming by Yeats, and
Mhm.
there's an image in it that a lion with the head of a man is moving its slow thighs somewhere in the sands of the desert. I've put that the wrong way around, but that's the image. And the slow thighs, when I heard it back, I'm like, oh, now this is giving me this very, very strange animalistic like scene in my head. And
Mhm.
that poem, again, one that I've read so many times and heard and read aloud so many times, gained this resonance that it didn't previously have. So to connect it to what you were saying, I think that poetry is a form of can be a form of transformation, and it has magic in it itself. Language on its
Mhm.
own is magical. It changes how we feel, it changes our perceptions, it engages with our imaginations. And if we use it well enough, I think we can create really, sustaining, quote unquote, good poetry from it. I wonder what you think about all that.
Yeah. I'm still thinking about slow thighs.
Yeah.
That's so good. I think that's so good because it starts with the S sound and it ends with the S sound, slow thighs. Like it really beautifully marries those two sounds. Um, yeah. Sorry, do you want to repeat what question or what you were prompting towards me, Nathan? I just couldn't get over the slow thighs.
Yeah, no worries. I have just to respond to that, I call it associative spirals. Sometimes if I'm listening to poems live and someone says a specific image, I kind of like zone out and maybe I don't hear the rest fully, but that one image it causes me to like
Yeah.
spiral through like associations. And to me, I'm like, that was such a good image that I have to stick with this. My question was, well, we were talking about poetry as transformation and a form of magic, and I was asking you whether, in light of what you're saying, like when you were lying in the water, what you found in poetry itself that gives you that sense of holiness, or however you would,
Hmm.
put language to it.
Hmm. I think I get a sense of touch. Like I feel like I'm touching something that I can't touch otherwise. Like I'm entering a realm that feels like not 1000% like my conscious thinking. And so it's almost like if this is the layer of unconscious thinking, like for a brief moment I get to dip my hand in there and like touch it. Um And like that sounds kind of simple, but it feels profound to me because that that's what I felt like when I was reading the Bible was like I could dip my hand into something. I had a piece of something that was of another world. And I feel that way with like similes in like those really good metaphors and those sounds. Like they almost feel like they're from another world or another dimension. And I think it's just because we don't really see that kind of language in our daily life very often. Like it's not common, so it feels special. And also sometimes it feels like a little secretive because you can do it in private. You can read poetry in private. You can write poetry in private. And also, like most people in your life are not actively reading poetry. So it's like your own kind of thing that you do in solitude. Like I think of Virginia Woolf's A Room of Her Own, like it's that sacred space that you can occupy for either 10 seconds while you read the poem or a few hours while you're reading a poem. Um, so yeah, I think it's just like the feeling that I get to touch something that's of another world. But I hope you're picking up what I'm putting down.
Yeah, I think you explained it well, and I think this is absolutely the point. And I think anyone that spends time with poetry kind of finds limits and failures in language to communicate profound feelings, and usually the
Mhm.
poem is the way in which to do that. It's especially difficult when you get to dialogue to be like, I'm at the edge of this thing and on the threshold of trying to get the right words, and they don't come
Mhm.
always. And that I think is part of it. I'm really pleased that you brought in this idea of it allows for touch. Like I think for me, like I mean, poetry is incredibly somatic. It's very bodily. I feel it deeply like bodily. And when I'm searching for poems, it's like, yes, I want my imagination to be alive. I want my intellect to connect. I want my heart to kind of, beat faster, but I also want my body to be able to feel what's going on
Mhm.
here. And I think you really, uh, pun intended, but like touch on that by talking about touch. Now, I don't want to give an image away from one of your poems, so I need to find the name of it, but I think this would be a great one to read out. My doctor says having a baby will cure my endometriosis, which is also in A Little Feral. So if you could please share that with us.
I would love to. This poem has an epigraph, so I'll start with the epigraph and then I'll read the poem from the title onwards. In a dream, you are never 80, Anne Sexton. My doctor says having a baby will cure my endometriosis. So I am still standing here in a linen dress, fresh and flat as a green onion, crying for a chance to grow a throat, a perfect heart, two little legs, soft like warm potatoes.
The ending image again with this these similes that carry across throughout your work, like the use of soft like warm potatoes really brought everything in this poem together. And now, I am male and don't understand pregnancy in any sense, but it still gives me a feeling of growth in my faux womb. Um, and your use again, I've noticed in this collection there's a lot of fruits and vegetables that come in.
Mhm.
Obviously, we got the potatoes. We always have fresh and flat as a green onion. Again, another simile here. Could you talk to us a little bit about this poem and also why you decided to use this epigraph?
Yeah. I'll start with the epigraph. Anne Sexton writes some of the poems that originally, like, really made me feel excited about the possibilities of poetry. This epigraph to me, it's a line from one of her poems, in The Awful Rowing Towards God. And this poem to me, or this epigraph to me, uh, kind of resonated with me. The idea that in a dream we are never old, like we are always, even when we think about our perfect body in heaven, we are young and we are full of life and vibrant. And so I wanted to start the poem with a sense that everyone has is holding on to our youth and our prime essentially. And I know that I mean personally, this poem is kind of personal, but it it came from a feeling like my childbearing years are dwindling very quickly, and I have stage 4 endometriosis. So there's a very big impact to my fertility from having endometriosis. So I was really just thinking about how, like, it's such a sad epigraph that in a dream you are never 80. But it was so true to me. I don't think, yeah, when I die and I can look back at my life, I don't think that my dream age of Maria will be 80. It will probably be like right now. So kind of gave that like immediate almost urgency to the poem. And then
Yeah.
for the green onion and the potato, I chose those images because they're like very domestic. They're, to me, I think of green onion, soft warm potatoes as woman's food in the kitchen for like it, and I don't mean that that's what it should be. It's just what I associate growing up. Like my mom was always in the kitchen. I love to cook, and I think it just felt very domestic to me, those images. And then soft like warm potatoes. A long time ago, somebody like wrapped up a warm potato at one of my family gatherings and pretended to rock it like it was a baby, and I thought that was really funny. And so that image like has never left my mind, that a warm potato is like kind of like a newborn. And it kind of works because sometimes they say like they come out looking like potatoes, you know? Um, so anyways, I'm trying to laugh because it was kind of an emotional poem for me, but yeah. And I wrote this poem. It was actually way longer, and I edited it like way, way, way down. It's super short. I think it's one of the shortest poems in the book.
Yeah, I think it's served by its shortness. And one thing I'm always interested in especially poems with an autobiographical eye is ensuring that a reader or some readers are invited into it. And I feel invited into this even though it's personal, and it's also something that I don't have, barring the idea of womb envy. I don't have like this kind of felt experience of this, but the poem allows me to kind of like get there through an empathy, and again, somatically, at least to get an approximation of what that might feel like. So I'm yeah, I'm a big fan of poems that use the autobiographical eye, but use it in a way that I'm also there, or a reader can also be there. Because sometimes I find poems that use the I can collapse too much into themselves, that they're so interior that there's no way of getting in. There's no door or window into the poem. So I do appreciate this on that level.
Thank you for saying that. And I think what that shows is that you're capable of being like having empathy, which is, I think, one of the best things that, one of the reasons why I think a lot of men should read more poetry is just that I think it's really, really useful in facilitating and practicing empathy. I mean, for everyone in general, but I don't know if I can say this, but men definitely.
No, no, I agree with this, and there's even, movements in this country that's in the US that talk about empathy being this form of weakness, whereas I'm like being able to, again, it's approximate or understand or feel the emotion of another person is
Hmm.
not a weak thing. The only
Yeah.
way I can kind of like, this is me being charitable to that argument, is if you're so empathetic, you spend all your day crying over everything that ever happens and you don't do anything. You just stay in bed being
Mhm.
sad about the world. But to empathize and to connect and to actually attempt to understand others' experiences, I mean, poetry is usually almost a training in that. And I agree with you.
Mhm.
And I have a slight kind of evangelicism about poetry itself, but I know that like dialoguing with it and allowing yourself to kind of be open to, let's say it's uncertainty. Keats talked about a negative capability, the ability to stay in uncertainties without reaching for facts or reason.
Mhm.
Poetry asks you to do that. I don't need to
Yes.
read this poem and be like, well, I'm not a woman, so you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
I can throw it and it doesn't mean anything to me. It's like, well, how can I kind of embody this and can I connect with it in some way? Yes. And some people maybe are more naturally empathetic than others, but I do think poetry, without it needing to be that, can form as some sort of like training in emotional response, let's say.
It's like occupying the in between we were talking about. The in between of this is not my experience, this is somebody else's experience, but I can enter that space of in betweenness and occupy it for the time being. And that I think is what empathy is. It's not stepping into the other person's shoes like sometimes we say, but it's like you're still your own person. You're not going to let that, like you said, come to the point of you crying in your room all day, every day, but for a brief moment you have like an investment in understanding. And I think, yeah,
Yeah.
that's like just such a beautiful thing that poetry lets us do.
Yeah. And I appreciate the term investment and understanding because investment is so often used financially and, it can have its other contexts. Yeah, no, I really appreciate, you sharing this. And I know that's another thing. It's like vulnerabilities. I like to speak about poetry is the opposite of small talk. And when we
Mm.
gather, in the local community out here in Malibu and out in Camarillo and anywhere else that I go, it's like, especially at these open mics, it's like people get up to the mic and they tell you everything. I think we spoke about this previously, but it's like you know more about a person through these readings in very little time than maybe you'll get to know someone that maybe is a coworker that you speak to every single day for 30 years.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. It allows you to collapse time in getting to know someone like significantly. And I remember the first time I met a big group of poets from my writing community gather in Chicago last summer. I thought maybe there was a chance that that wouldn't be the case for someone that you've gotten to know online. I thought maybe it would be awkward, like because I had done this in person with other poets, but not with poets I'd written online. And I'm happy to report that it is the exact same feeling. Like writing with someone over Zoom, getting to know them, and then meeting them in person is like you just instantaneously you have reached a level of intimacy with another stranger that, yeah, it is very rare. And I think, yeah, that's another great thing that poetry has given me is just the ability to connect with other people on about these things in such a short amount of time. And like I said, I struggled to sort of fit in high school, so it makes me emotional to think about what the gift of poetry has done for my ability to connect with people. And it's so affirming to me to know that it was never me. It was, I hadn't found my people yet. And now that I have, like, it's so beautiful. It's, yeah, I just want that for as many people, as many poets as possible.
Yeah, and one thing I see with this too is from being in a community for, I think I'm in my ninth year of knowing these people and seeing the poetry itself improve, the
Mm.
craft of the poets have improved astronomically. And I've been told before when I've spoken about, I think we can all improve our craft. Someone said, oh, something to do with being an elitist. And I'm like, no, the ability to increase how effectively we use language is good. That doesn't mean don't start somewhere. We all have to start somewhere. That doesn't mean you've written something and it's not the most groundbreaking poem in the world and it's the first one you've written that it's not valid that you expressed that. It means express these things in the way that you know best. But also, if you add these tools to your toolkit, you spoke a little bit earlier. We are talking about like repetition, talking about how to use line breaks well and stanzas. And, you even said with this poem you just read, that you made it a lot shorter. You got out, you cut it down. And there's something, especially in the poem that you read, it's about a baby. It's like,
Mhm.
well, it's small. It's more precious. The lines are really short, it makes sense.
Mhm.
And I was reading, I know we spoke about the pronunciation of this poet, Louise Gluck
I'm
is
sure. I'm not
that
sure.
she was talking about how, excess doesn't necessarily mean better. And of course, poems are compression. And I like to tell people, like, I think of them like a spring. And like,
Mhm.
you want to hold the spring like that. You want each line to be packed with an energy that
Mhm.
wants you to keep going as well. So it's like you're holding tension. And to add to that, I think it's good for poets to learn more
Mhm.
storytelling also, even if you write predominantly lyric poetry in
Mhm.
storytelling. So I think it's good to kind of learn from these diverse arts to also
Mhm.
serve our poems.
Yeah, I think it's also respecting yourself as a poet, to reach for places of discomfort and reach for new opportunities and like to really push your craft. Like I think that it's loving yourself for the writer that you are and then respecting and being excited for the writer that you know you can become. Like I think those two things can happen simultaneously. And I also think that pushing yourself in your craft doesn't have to be studious. Like, I don't think it has to be sitting at a textbook and studying what a line break is and what a, enjambment is or like how all of these different meters and stuff. Like, I think sometimes people will pick up a craft book from the 90s and think like this is what it means to be a real poet is I need to know what iambic pentameter is and memorize it and learn it. But I've like just literally from case studies from what I have seen and gather, I think we go a lot further when we go together. I think it's an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Just by being in the company of other people who are excited about poetry, you will improve your poetry because you're doing the thing that really, if you don't take away anything else from this podcast in terms of like craft, the best advice is just to read poetry. And if you're in community with other poets and you're constantly, giving feedback and receiving feedback on your poems, what you're doing is you're reading poetry often and consistently every week or every month or whatever your rhythm is when you're meeting with your poetry community. Um, but just rubbing shoulders with other people who love what you do is momentum building, and you're going to want to become a better poet because you're doing this thing together. It's not something you do on your own. Like, you go to dance class with other people to become better, and it's exciting because you're dancing with others and others are getting better, and that improves. Like, there's something about doing these things in the company of other people that in itself is almost more powerful than the actual lessons that are being taught. It's just that it happens in enjoy like I think almost like our consciousness borrows from each other in these types of environments. Like we share knowledge so much more effectively, and we retain knowledge and we like source knowledge more effectively. Like one of our biggest sort of um, like beliefs and gather is knowledge sharing. I really don't want to gatekeep anything. And one of the things we do on a monthly basis is we meet and we talk. It's called Manuscript Support Group, and it's basically like all the questions you've ever had about publishing, putting together a manuscript, we all just knowledge share. So everybody shares what they know, and then the next person shares what they know, the next person shares what they know, and we just share everything. And it's so beautiful because it's just like a buffet and a feast, and we go so much further than together than if we were to go alone.
I think that's really nicely put. I agree. You don't need to know everything of all the different terms and things that you can use in the iambic pentameter. I don't think that you're disserviced by also learning these things, even if you never use them. If you
Mhm.
understand things about how language is constructed, I do think you can improve the way in which you express it and the choices that you make when it comes to poetry. But the way that I feel definitely, similar to you is don't let that scare you off. Like
Mm,
the best thing to honor what you want to do is to write and is to read writers. And then the next best thing I think is to learn how to improve. And again, it's just adding tools. And the more, I didn't come here from a background in learning all this. I learned quite a lot of this stuff later. I didn't study English. I stopped in England. We stopped school at 15. I didn't study English after that. I was, hopelessly behind. I went eventually to study a creative writing master's and I was like, oh no, they're going to be way better read than I am, which is true in literature itself. And I've been piecing back, but I have noticed a personal thing and from others, the more soft skills and the more things that you understand, I think the better you are equipped to come to the table when
mm.
you're writing.
Yeah. I think you can also follow what is interesting. Like if there are 10,000 things to learn, first of all, like you said, um don't let that intimidate you from starting. But also
Mm.
like if iambic pentameter interests you, definitely pick up a book about meter and learn about it. But maybe it's sound that really excites you. And I think these things sort of build on each other. If you start with one thing that you really love, then you discover how sound and line breaks are tied. And now all of a sudden you're really interested in learning about line breaks. Um, but I think like sometimes the the apprehension that I have heard other poets have is just that there's so much to learn, and it feels like everything needs to be learned at once or else I can't start writing until I've learned. And um I think it's important to encourage folks to start now and then slowly develop your poetic tool belt as deemed by your interests and what is exciting to you at the time.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. And I would liken that to any base of knowledge, anything you find interesting to
Mhm.
learn, even outside of the art, and also, communicate with things outside of just the expression of the art, because it all can flow into it. And I don't know about you, but there's sometimes I'll receive a book and I'll open it and I'll read maybe even 20 pages and I'm like, I have absolutely no idea what I'm reading. So it goes back
Mhm.
on the shelf. And then maybe over the next 2 or 3 years, I'm reading things that are similar and I come back to the book, I open it, I'm like,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
I've like managed to fashion a key to understand this thing. And I didn't need to be at the place originally when I received the book, like I must understand this. Oh no. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, well, I'm gonna go build knowledge and make it fun as well. Learning things should also be like its own form of pleasure. Like,
Totally.
if like you said, if it interests you and it pulls you towards it, then it's good to honor that. And again, it's also about time,
Mhm.
commitment,
Yeah.
energy. Some people have more time than others. Maybe some people are studying in school and they're surrounded by it. Other people, maybe they're working 60-hour weeks and don't have, they can't listen to a audiobook or a podcast while they're working or whatever else. So it is also, there's a, very real world constraints that can
Mhm.
hold us back from doing these things too. So yeah, I want to just reiterate the important thing is if you want to write and express yourself, you can
Yeah,
and do it.
yeah, I like that. And we have the rest of our lives as artists and as writers to write. Like our career doesn't end at 30 like an athlete's does. So again, like we can take 50 years to learn everything there is to learn. Like it's the beautiful thing is that it stops when we can't either mentally figure it out anymore or we die, you know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think, barring I don't know if you get like a finger injury from typing, but unlike sports people, your chance, and there's other methods, you maybe you can speak to text or speak things
Yeah,
or even put
probably.
them, think them and have come up with them in your head. So there's a lot of different methods that you can go through in order to make a
Mhm.
poem. So, how would you like to share another poem? I mean, I would love if we could hear the poem that ends your collection. Are you willing to share that?
I would love to. Yeah. This poem is called The Final Preparation. We die with blood in our veins, faith salivating in our mouths, still slick as a spring trout, taut as a winded kite. It takes a while for us to truly wither. This is fine. Really, it's perfect. N comes not like a robber at midnight, but like a stray cat to a front door, tamed over weeks. One must trust the recipe for dying, perhaps even prepare a little by slipping a finger into the reaper's jaw. Let the salt be sucked off, easy like a rib. Let it fall off the bone.
It's a great poem to finish your collection. I was really, delighted when I came to the first and the second reading that I did of your manuscripts. Like I found myself a bit like when you listen to an album, there's an anticipatory element that comes in
Yeah.
after you know what to expect. And coming back through the collection, I was like, I'm on this ride and I am excited to get to this last poem at the same time. So it kind of kept my attention all the way through to get to the end of the collection as well. And you know, still slick as a spring trout. You've got these similes again coming all the way through, and just the slipping a finger into the Reaper's jaw and all that. It became like this almost ecstatic, but like subtly ecstatic entry into death through the threshold for me. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
well
thank you so
placed
much.
and well put. Yeah.
Thank you.
So before I ask you a question that, I think would be really fun for our viewers as we move towards the end of this, I would like to ask where people can find you, where they can pre-order your book. Of course, we're going to put all these things in the description, but I also think it's good to hear from you directly about these things.
Yeah, mainly I'm on Instagram. I'm at the Guelph Poet. And I'm also on Substack. My Substack is mariagiesbrecht.substack.com. That is where I will announce my tour dates coming up very soon. I'm going to be spending some time in Canada and in the US in May, and I might be coming to a city near you. So you can pre order my book preferably from your local independent bookstore. You can find the website for your local independent bookstore, search for my book, and you will most likely find it. If you prefer something a little more accessible, my book is on Amazon, bookshop.org, Indigo, and apparently Target and Walmart. I didn't know that, but you can order it from there as well if that's easier. But like I said, I really believe in supporting independent bookstores, so please support your local one, and I'm sure they would be very happy to order it for you.
Before I ask you this last question, is there anything else that you wanted to share?
No, I just wanted to say I've been really, really enjoying this conversation, and I just hope folks listening are really excited about this, the possibility of a poem and the possibility of poetry in general. And um, it's been truly a pleasure being hosted on the Poetry Vessel. You're doing so many wonderful things, Nathan. And yeah, I'm really excited about this.
Thank you. So, thing I like to ask guests now is to say concluding words, but you have 20 and I count them on your fingers. So
Oh
if
my
you can get to
God.
exactly 20 words with any takeaway that you think might be best, poetic or not, let us have them.
Okay, I think I got it.
All
I
right.
think I got 20. I hope it's not more, but I hope you lean into the feral, trembling truth of yourself and find the bold and gutsy poet within you.
Amazing. I didn't
Is that
count, but
good? I think
yeah, it
it's
was
20.
great. Yeah, yeah, it is good. All
Okay.
right, Maria. Well, thank you for being on the Poetry Vessel.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I truly had so much fun.
If you want to check out Maria's book, A Little Feral, we've put all of the information in the description box below. And if you'd like to sign up to our community-focused mailing list, please go to www.thepoetryvessel.com/sign up. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.